All right. Okay, this evening we're going to be going through Daniel chapter 2. Now, Daniel chapter 2 is a rather lengthy passage, but I think we can actually get through this. Obviously, because of the length of it, I'm not going to read every single verse here. Some of it we're going to summarize, because the biggest issue is the introduction of 4 kingdoms. And from this point forward, for the next few weeks, we're actually going to be back in Daniel. We're going to go from Daniel chapter 2, chapter 7, and then pick up the last couple of chapters in Daniel, and then go back to Revelation chapter 13. The reason we're taking this particular little side trip back to Daniel is for the remainder of Revelation, or at least the next few chapters, we get the details from John about the type of government and the things that are going to be going on within the tribulation period, and who's going to be in charge of the earth. And Daniel actually gives us the best explanation that we have as to how that kingdom arises, where it's coming from, who's going to be in charge. And so that's the reason I've held off on this particular part of Daniel until this point. Now, while we're doing that, of course, keeping in mind next Sunday night we're going to take a break because of our 5th Sunday and watch a movie and just have a good time and eat popcorn and junk food and make ourselves sick with... No?
Kind of like what we do on Sunday night.
Yeah, what we always do.
Why not?
Eating popcorn and junk food while we watch a movie. All right. This coming Wednesday, and probably for the next 2 Wednesdays, we're going to take yet a break in the break. And this is what you've been waiting on. I've got a 4-part video series that I'm going to show. I've got to still preview it and make sure that it does in fact say what I think it says. And it's on Hebrew astronomy, and it specifically addresses the issue of signs in the sky. Begins with Genesis and the creation account, and then goes forward to Revelation chapter 12 and gives us an astronomical explanation of what John is talking about in Revelation chapter 12. We've looked so far at the meaning of it and how we might interpret it, but I want you to see from an astronomical perspective what it was that John saw and what it is he's interpreting. And just as a little, I guess, a heads up on this, and again, I've already given this explanation twice so far, so I'm not going to do it again, but as far as the difference in astrology versus astronomy, this video series is specifically on astronomy. And the guy actually pointed out something that I knew was there, but I hadn't really thought about it until he pointed it out. But in the creation account itself, when God created the stars in the heaven, does everybody remember what the Bible actually says there and why God created the stars?
Was that basically something about times for planting and things of that sort?
No. Well, although that's probably the result of some of that, and one of the, I guess the things you could draw, or the conclusions you could draw from this.
Let them be signs for the seasons.
Okay, there
and
you
for
go.
the days and years.
All right, there you go. Now, which verse was that?
14.
14. All right. God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." Now, what is the operative word in that passage of Scripture? Signs. So, to look at the celestial bodies and to understand that God is giving us warnings and telling us about things that might happen, that's not, again, that is not astrology. That's straight out of Scripture and what God has told us in His Word as to why He put them there. So if God put them there for signs to tell us what was going to go on, well, shouldn't we as God's people be paying attention to that? So that is our scriptural precedent and our marching orders for what we need to be doing and why this information is important. So this coming Wednesday, and I can tell you now, it's going to take us 2 Wednesdays to go over because it's about an hour and a half worth of stuff. But this Wednesday and then the next Wednesday, we'll be looking at that. And then once we get through that, these 4 chapters in Daniel, then we'll pick up after that with Revelation chapter 13. All right, but for now, Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel chapter 2 here, the bulk of what is going on here has nothing to do with Daniel specifically, but Nebuchadnezzar. And by the way, and again, not that this makes really any difference, and certainly does not affect what it means to us, but this is where Daniel switches gears in the writing of his book, which again, we can't see this in the English, but beginning in chapter 2, Daniel didn't write in Hebrew. He switched to Aramaic. Why do you think Daniel wrote chapter 2 and beginning for the next several chapters wrote in Aramaic, which was the Babylonian court language?
So they can read it.
Well,
Gentile.
but who's doing the talking here?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel is basically acting as a court reporter at this point and writing down what Nebuchadnezzar said and what he declared. Now, there were 2 main languages in Babylon at this particular time. The country language, the language that most of the people spoke, was an ancient language called Akkadian. Not Akkadian as in Cajun French or anything like that. It was basically an ancient language that was related to this, but anyway, it's called Akkadian, spelled with A-K-K, and I'm not going to spell the rest of it. But the court language, which was more exact and basically the language spoken there in Babylon and the official language of the empire, was in fact Aramaic. And that is how, after they'd been deported to Babylon and the Hebrews were forced to learn Aramaic, how when they came back from Babylon, they lost the Hebrew language, and the spoken language of the day in Israel from that point forward was no longer Hebrew, it was Aramaic. And this whole section of Daniel is written in Aramaic because, again, the prime character here that Daniel is quoting is Nebuchadnezzar, who would have been speaking in Aramaic. Now, at this time, keep in mind, Daniel was not one of the big court officials. He was just one of the youth who was coming near to finishing his 3 years in Babylonian training. So, now, verse 1 says, "Now in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him." Now, let me just mention this. Notice it says in the 2nd year. In their method of keeping, when a ruler ascended to the throne, they would call that the accession year. His first complete year, which would, like, for example, if a guy ascended the throne in Well, our calendar goes from January through December. Let's say you ascended the throne in April. From April through December, you would call that the accession year. Then beginning that following January, that would then begin what you would call the first year. So in this, when he says this was in the second year, this would have been the session year plus first year, then somewhere during that second year. Now, Daniel had been taken into captivity at about the time that Nebuchadnezzar had ascended the throne. How long was the period of training for Daniel and his friends? Anybody remember?
You already gave us a hint, 3 years.
3 years, there you go. We studied that in chapter 1.
Yeah, but you just said it a little bit ago.
I did, but I'm seeing how many of you listened. So if this is in Nebuchadnezzar's second year, that would have been, or would mean that Daniel was probably somewhere in his third year of training, which would mean he's still one of the youths in training. He's in school. He is not a court official at this point. He's just a teenager, and by this point, probably maybe 17, 18 years old. So it says the king gave orders to call in the magicians and the Chaldeans, the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans, to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. Now, why this is important as far as Daniel, Daniel would not have been in this group. Why not?
He was still in training.
He's still in school. There you go. It says, so the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. The Chaldean spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. Now, I'm going to kind of summarize the rest of it, because I'm sure just about all of us in here is at least roughly familiar with this or read this at some point in the past. And what happened? Anybody remember?
They couldn't do it, so Daniel ended up.
He refused
Well,
to tell them the dream. He wanted them to tell him what the dream was.
Exactly.
To tell the dream.
Why did Nebuchadnezzar insist on them telling him what he dreamed?
Because that would prove that they really knew what was
There you
going
go,
on.
because he knew that if he told them the dream, they could cook up any interpretation and say, oh, well, it means this. Well, he figured, nope, that's not good enough. Because the Chaldeans and these conjurers claimed, and this was what Nebuchadnezzar was testing, they claimed that we hear this directly from the gods. We're able to interpret this because the gods tell us. Well, Nebuchadnezzar basically figures, okay, if the gods are in communication with you, then you can tell me what the dream is. If you can't tell me the dream, then I know that you don't know what you're talking about when you interpret the dream, and you're lying to me when you tell me that you're in communication with the gods. So he gives them an ultimatum. You tell me what I dreamed and the interpretation, or I'm going to have every single one of you executed. Well, now this is why later on, when the king's chief executioner is going out rounding them up, Daniel then, as he comes in and rounds up the students as well, Daniel's asking him, like, what's going on and what's the big rush? In fact, look in verse 4. Let's drop down to verse 14. Arioch, by the way, is the chief guard and executioner who's been given the task of rounding up all of the conjurers and the Chaldeans and such. Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's commander, what reason is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So basically Arioch's telling Daniel, said, well, the king, this is what happened, and the king issued an order that every last one of you got to be executed. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, about the matter. Now, does everybody remember who Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are? Yeah.
That's the other
Most people remember them by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which was, of course, not their real names. in order that he might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Now notice also in verse 18 what Daniel has put down here. He's not requesting that all the wise men of Babylon not be put to death. Notice he's saying that, well, I'm looking for, an opportunity here that I can pray and find out what God will tell me so that, I and my 3 friends won't suffer their fate. He wasn't necessarily worried about them. Why do you think Daniel really wasn't all that concerned about the rest of them?
Because of who they are.
Yeah, he figured they were conjurers and magicians. He knew that under the law of Moses, they actually did deserve to die. But not him and his 3 friends, because they weren't among these conjurers and magicians.
He also isn't looking for compassion from Nebuchadnezzar. He's looking for it from God. He knows God's in control.
There you go. Good point there. And so, why do you think Arioch actually allowed him to go into the king and make this request rather than say, nope, the king's already issued the order, you're headed out to the gallows, buddy?
He'd already been successful in the past, hadn't he?
Nope.
No?
This is the first time.
So he doesn't have to
He
go
probably
out there
didn't want to
and
have to
fight
kill
with
all
God.
those people.
There you go. Arioch's just been given a command to kill off probably who knows how many. There could have been several hundred of these conjurers and magicians. And anybody that's at least got a semblance of humanity about him isn't going to be looking forward to having to execute that many people. And most of us wouldn't be all that crazy about executing one, much less a whole bunch of them. So I'm sure Arioch figured, hey, buddy, if you think you can do it, let's go, because I'm really not looking forward to having to do this. All right, now verse 19 is when it gets real interesting here. It says, then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. Notice here, Daniel gives God credit immediately. Now, by the way, if Daniel and his 3 friends are praying, why is it that it says that God revealed this to him in a night vision? I mean, we kind of see this as sort of a dream or whatever. Do you really think Daniel and his 3 friends were sleeping? They're under a sentence of death also. And just because Nebuchadnezzar has seen fit to give them a little bit of time to see if they can come up with an answer does not mean that Nebuchadnezzar has withdrawn his command. He's just given them a couple of extra days before he tells Arioch to carry out the sentence. So are they at home having a good night's sleep?
Worrying.
Oh, they're probably on their knees praying all night. The point here being is that while God does speak to some people in dreams, and God has spoken to Nebuchadnezzar in a dream, even though Nebuchadnezzar wasn't one of God's people, and we'll get to that here shortly. Daniel had dreams, from time to time. We see Joseph had dreams. Jacob had some dreams. God does speak to people in dreams, but sometimes he just gives it to you in a vision or speaks to you directly. God talks to different people different ways. So the fact that he says he had a vision at night does not mean the same thing as I had a dream. He apparently was on his knees praying, and God somehow allowed Daniel to see what was going on and to understand it, even though Daniel probably was wide awake at the time. Verse 21 said, "As he who changes the times and the epochs, he removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. To thee, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for thou hast given me wisdom and power. Even now thou hast made known to me what we requested of thee, for thou hast made known to us the king's matter." Therefore Daniel went in to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and spoke to him as follows: "Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon." He says, "Take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king." Then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel into the king's presence, spoke to him as follows: "I've found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king." Now, What's Arioch just done here?
Took credit.
Yeah. Oh, hey, King. I found the guy. I did it. Arioch may be not interested in wanting to kill all these guys, but he's still a pagan and wanting to get credit.
It's interesting he has that much trust in Daniel's interpretation.
Yeah. Because it would have been interesting if he went in and said, "Oh, I found the guy, King," and then he gives him and then Daniel says, "Well, no, I couldn't do it," or he's wrong. You think the king's going to look at Arioch and say,
King might kill both of you.
Arioch, you're fired. Bozo, you're now the chief guy. Take Arioch with you and deal with him too." So yeah, he's kind of definitely put some faith in Daniel here. King answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. Now notice again, Daniel, even though Daniel's name is not Belteshazzar, this is the pagan name that Nebuchadnezzar gave him. He puts this in here just to remind the readers that he's not some other Daniel. Because again, in Hebrew at the time, Daniel was not an uncommon name. So he says, this is the Daniel whose name was also Belteshazzar, so that as generations later, as they would read this, they would know, nope, this is the Daniel we're talking about. He says, "Are you able to make known to me the dream which I've seen and its interpretation?" Daniel answered before the king and said, "As for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners are able to declare it to the king. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed." Now notice, unlike Arioch, who said, "Hey, I did it, I found him," Daniel immediately says, "Nope." And he agrees with the other diviners and the conjurers and says, "Nope, there's not a man alive on earth that can do this." What does he do? And you probably figure he's taking his own life in his hands, because at that point Nebuchadnezzar could very easily have said, "Well, in that case, you're with the rest of them. Take him out." But he continues on. What does Daniel do before Nebuchadnezzar has a chance to respond?
Proclaims God.
Yeah. He said, "Nope, God can do this. There is a God in heaven." Notice he didn't say, "Among the many gods that you worship." He gives credit to the one true God. Says, there is a God in heaven. Now, this is the first instance that we have in the book of Daniel where Nebuchadnezzar gets his first introduction to the true God. Because prior to this, Nebuchadnezzar is what's called polytheism. Everybody know what polytheism or polytheistic means?
Many gods.
Yeah, believes in a lot of gods. He's a polytheistic pagan. Daniel takes this opportunity to say, nope, there is a God who can do this. This is his first opportunity to witness to Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 29. As for you, O king, while on your bed your thoughts turn to what would take place in the future, and he who reveals mystery has made known to me what will take place. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me more than in any other living man, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. You figure by this point, just imagine Nebuchadnezzar's probably sitting on his throne going, yeah, uh-huh. But at this point, as soon as he said, this is what you were dreaming, you saw this big statue, what do you think Nebuchadnezzar probably started doing then?
Okay.
Uh-huh. Keep going. You probably got his attention at this point.
Yes.
Because he's told him there is a God. Now, this is again, as I said, Daniel's first opportunity to witness to Nebuchadnezzar. Now we know that it didn't get quite through to him at this point, because later on down the road, what is one of the next things? In fact, we're not going to, we've already studied chapter 3, so we're going to skip that. We're not going to rehash it, but in our study of chapter 3, what did Nebuchadnezzar do?
Claimed himself king of kings.
Well, Nebuchadnezzar, later on in chapter 3, constructed himself this great statue out on the plain outside of Babylon that he demanded that everybody come and worship this statue. Where do you think he got the idea for this great statue that he had his
dream?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, we know from chapter 3, this statue was apparently, in our terms, about 90 feet tall. So when Daniel says, well, you saw this great statue, that's probably, again, what he's talking about, and that's where Nebuchadnezzar got the idea for it. So imagine Nebuchadnezzar in his mind, in his dream at night, is standing before this 90-foot tall statue just thinking, whoa. Probably got Nebuchadnezzar's, attention as well. All right, now verse 32, this is where it really gets interesting. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands. Where have we heard that before? And it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, and the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. God clearly revealed to Nebuchadnezzar, even though Nebuchadnezzar at this point was a pagan and didn't know what its meaning was, revealed to him what we're now seeing unfolding before us today. Now, why do you think God chose to reveal this to Nebuchadnezzar? And we'll look at the interpretation here in just a minute. I think probably at this point the more important question is why?
Nebuchadnezzar was a tool of God.
All right.
And he used him to administer judgment on Israel. And I also think that he just used him also to convey this message and pass this on for the future.
I think there's two reasons at stake here. You just hit on one of them. Just because Nebuchadnezzar was a pagan, how many times have we seen in the Bible that God actually used people who were not godly people to accomplish his will in spite of themselves? And Nebuchadnezzar was a good example of that. Nebuchadnezzar, by this point in history, had already been used by God to execute judgment upon the disbelieving Jews. The second reason I think this is the first step in bringing Nebuchadnezzar to faith in God, because as we continue through the process, we know and again, we've already studied this part about 3 or 4 months ago, thank you. When Nebuchadnezzar was sitting up on the balcony overlooking the hanging gardens of Babylon, does anybody remember what Nebuchadnezzar did or said and what happened?
He took claim for everything that was there, that he did it.
Yep. Daniel had already come to him a year earlier. Nebuchadnezzar had, you recall, he'd had another dream. And Daniel told him when he interpreted that dream, Daniel said, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, this is not good. You need to repent now." Well, Nebuchadnezzar, by this point, had been introduced to God. He knew who Daniel's God was, but he was not yet a believer. And Daniel's saying, God is giving you one more chance. Nebuchadnezzar, you need to repent now. Well, he didn't. A year later, he's sitting up on his balcony just thinking, Nebuchadnezzar, oh, you magnificent man, look what you have done. And at that point, he said he heard the voice from heaven telling him, Now's the time. You're done. And we're told that for 7 years after that, he ran wild and crazy like an animal, which was exactly what Daniel had told him was going to happen. Said until he gave credit and acknowledged God Almighty as the one who was ultimately in charge. And sure enough, 7 years later, we're told that Nebuchadnezzar came to his senses. He's running out in the field naked like an animal, and finally looks up and realizes, oh, what a fool I've been. Daniel's God is the true God, and he does, do what he wants. He's the one in charge. We're told he came to his senses. He acknowledged God. God allowed him to get cleaned up, gave him his kingdom back. But at that point, Nebuchadnezzar publicly declared Daniel's God. Of course, he referred to Daniel's God, said Daniel's God, he is the true God. And the statement that he made would lead us to believe that Daniel's God was now what?
Nebuchadnezzar's God.
Also Nebuchadnezzar's God, because he acknowledged that, yes, he is the true God. He is the King of Kings, and he's the one that's in charge. And he declared, my whole kingdom will now worship this God. So I think that's the second part of all this, is that God used Nebuchadnezzar, or used him, not only to speak to us and to the people of Israel at the time, but he used these dreams to bring Nebuchadnezzar through a process that Nebuchadnezzar declared faith in God. Because here's the other question we haven't asked ourselves, and even Daniel himself doesn't really address it. If Nebuchadnezzar declared his faith in the God of Israel, because Nebuchadnezzar was the king, and even the Babylonians acknowledged that Nebuchadnezzar was probably one of the greatest kings that ever walked the face of the earth. What do you think the rest of the Babylonians did?
Fell in line.
Yeah, we know that Babylon as a rule and as an empire was still pagan. But we can only imagine the number of other Babylonians that might have actually paid attention to this and came to faith in God. Because, well, for example, look at Nineveh. Why did God send Jonah to Nineveh? Nineveh was a pagan city.
To save them.
Yeah.
Save them from what they're doing.
That they might be saved as well. And apparently, the Ninevites, at least during Jonah's lifetime, they repented. Well, how do we know that God didn't use Nebuchadnezzar to accomplish exactly the same thing with Babylon? There's no telling how many hundreds or thousands of Babylonians may have declared their faith in the God of Israel because of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. All right, now, back to the last part. What does this whole thing mean? Verse 36. This was the dream. Now we shall tell its interpretation before the king. Now, by the way, who's we? There's two possibilities here.
God and Daniel.
God, Daniel.
Yeah, it's either Daniel and his three friends, or Daniel is speaking plurally and poetically of Daniel and God Almighty. Could be either one, but there's no indication that Daniel's three friends were actually invited in to see the king as well. So the most popular interpretation, as we said, we'll tell the king what it means, is he's speaking on behalf of God. It says, you, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Now, this part, again from this forward, is important. Because this is where it actually comes full circle to today. 4 kingdoms.
Fix your N.
Huh?
Fix your N.
Oh, quit worrying about my end. All right. First kingdom is, of course, Babylon. Then, second one, verse 39. And after you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over the earth. Now, at this point in history, Daniel does not identify who these two are. We are going to see that identified later on. That's one of the reasons why from here we skip over to chapter 7, because these other two kingdoms are later identified. But who did the Babylonian Empire fall to?
Meta-Persian.
Meta-Persian. And it was, in fact, we find out later, and I'm just kind of giving you a heads up at this point. Daniel just skims over it at this point. He just says, well, there's a second empire, and then there's going to be a third empire. Doesn't name them. But again, trust me, he does name them later. But this second one is...
It's clear who he means with the third one, though.
Yeah. The Meta-Persian Empire. And the third one, he says, there's another third kingdom of bronze which will rule over all the earth. Well, who overthrew the Meta-Persian Empire?
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great. We have the Greek Empire. And in fact, it was in this third empire right after Alexander the Great died, and then his kingdom was broken up into 4 parts, that Antiochus Epiphanes ruled over the part that included Israel, which led to the rise of the first abomination of desolations. It's one of the reasons why we're told about this whole thing and why these kingdoms are important. But now here's the other issue. It says, verse 40 says, then there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron. And it said, verse 41, and that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but it will have the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong, and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine one with another in seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. In other words, it's going to be a multi-ethnic, multicultural empire, but it will never meld as, a common people, is what Daniel is saying. Of course, what kingdom arose after Alexander the Great's empire? Rome. And Rome was known for being a brutal, strong empire, one of the strongest empires ever on the face of the earth. However, because of immorality and false gods and idolatry, even the Roman Empire fell. But you'll notice in Daniel's vision, he said the legs were solid iron. That's the Roman Empire we've studied in world history. But he said there was something different about the feet. What was different about the feet?
Half clay.
Yeah, it was a mixed empire. And also, how many toes does a person have?
10.
10 of them. That's not merely coincidental. Now I'm going to give you a little heads up here on why this whole thing about all these empires is important. Daniel does not discuss it here in this chapter. In fact, it was not revealed to him at this point. But later on, we're going to see that in the days to come, there's going to be yet another empire which will arise, which we're seeing the makings of it now, where the Roman Empire is going to be revived. Now, it's not going to be the Roman Empire in the sense that the Roman Empire was before, where, they were, a militaristic empire ruled by the Roman legions. But it's going to be an empire that's modeled after the Empire of Rome, possibly with its headquarters in Rome. And it's going to be a nation far as we can tell from what Scripture has revealed to us and what we will study as time proceeds, a 10-nation or a 10-kingdom confederation, all basically a revival of the Roman Empire. Now, what is it that's peculiar, certainly from our perspective theologically, that Rome has that does not apply to any of these first three? What's different about Rome?
The Republic is the only thing.
Christianity was around during the
Well,
time
not
of
only
Rome.
that, take that to the next step. What's Rome got that the other empires didn't?
Catholicism, the Pope.
Christ.
Catholicism. What's right in the middle of Rome today? Vatican City. And we know as, and again, this is one of those things where, you know, I told you as we started, there's just so, this is almost like putting a puzzle together. We've gotten part of a piece here, but this is the piece that's missing, and I'm kind of giving you a heads up that we're going to see this as we go along, that the Catholic Church does play an important part in our understanding of what will happen for the future. And again, the biggest thing that Rome's got, the others didn't, the Vatican City is parked right in the middle of Rome. Now, how many of us know Catholics? Or have a friend that's a Catholic or whatever?
My husband.
How many of us know Catholics that think they're saved but haven't got a clue who God really is? Okay. Now, again,
Look at the government.
probably there are some of us that know, and I have met some. I've personally
You would be
don't.
speaking about our president?
Okay, well that's a good example. Wasn't particularly thinking about him, but okay, I'll take that
He's
example.
been portrayed by the media as a good Catholic.
Yeah. My point is that yes, I can personally tell you I have met some Catholics that I thought were in fact Christians. That they, you know, if you ask them, okay, what's your faith based on, and you know, is what makes you a Christian? Honestly, believe that while I didn't agree with them, you know, doctrinally, they had a relationship with Christ. However, of the Catholics that I have met over the years, those would be definitely in the minority. Overwhelming majority of Catholics that I have met over the years don't have a clue who God really is. They've been taught certain things. They base their faith on, well, I was christened at such and such a time, or my mom was a Catholic, or I was in the church. But they don't have a relationship with Christ. So my point there is, come rapture time, where's the bulk of the Catholic Church going to be?
Here?
Still right here doing business. And let me pause there. Mario, you had a point.
Being saved is not even in the Catholic's vernacular. You don't hear that in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
Because you go to the priest. The priest is your line to God. You don't have a line to God. And so being saved, they don't have any idea, because they're coming at it the way the Catholics want them to come at it, that they need the priest to hear your confession, and then he'll go to God and take your sins to God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole part of the Catholic religion. Being saved, asking God into your heart, I never heard that at all. So that's not part of it at
Yeah.
all. Part
And
of
that's-
the religion.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm telling you now that I fully believe the Catholic Church is going to have a significant role to play during the tribulation period.
Yeah, I believe that.
But according to what Daniel is getting at, and why this particular vision is important, is it sets the ground, or the foundation I should say, for what is going to develop later, that in the tribulation period, this empire, number 4, Rome, is going to be revived. It won't be in exactly the same form as the ancient Roman Empire, but if you at some point over the next few years begin to see Rome emerge politically, or a European confederation. Now we know there's already used to be the common market, but that kind of went away. Now we've got the European Union. But if you see at some point something like that, a confederation of states in Europe, if at some point they number 10, 10 is the big magic number, because as we'll see as we continue on, this revived Roman Empire is going to be a confederation of 10 kings or 10 nations. You better get your bags packed, because that is what is going to exist during the tribulation period. Now, I will say this much that may already be in place. A lot of the current nations that make up the European Union are democracies. And in that I mean, for example, England. England's a constitutional monarchy. It is not a quote-unquote democracy. It's a constitutional monarchy. There is a king in England. Spain has a royal family. Denmark has a royal family. On the other hand, Germany does not. France doesn't. They used to have, but they killed them all off. So you see, the point I'm making there is, even within the European Union, there could be multiple countries, but if you start counting how many kings there are, because as we continue on, later on, what is both Daniel and the book of Revelation will reveal is that this beast, which the term beast, and that's why I'm beginning with chapter 2, and we go to chapter 7, Daniel starts talking about these beasts instead of this statue. Later, it's interpreted as a beast, this big animal, that he then tells us, well, this beast, this animal, represents, and again, it's the same 4 empires. Revelation then starts talking about the beast. So we can see prophetically, if this beast is an empire, and later in Revelation we're told this beast has 10 crowns or 10 heads, well, it's possible that the European Union, just as an example, I'm not here to tell you the European Union is the beast emerging from the pit. We don't know that yet, and I would say that's a definite maybe at this point. But if you count the number of countries, say in the European Union, that have royal families and who have potential kings, like England, like Denmark, and a couple of others, I think the last time I counted them up, you want to guess? Take a wild guess at how many there were?
9.
10. There were more countries in the European Union, but at least 10 of them had royal families.
10 of them?
10 of them.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So anyway, now the last part, and we'll finish with this for tonight. The rock that busted them all up. Verse 44 said, "In those days of the kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed." Of course, we know that's the millennial kingdom. Daniel is speaking prophetically there of the second coming. It says it will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. In other words, it's not going to fall by the wayside. It's not going to have some other kingdom that's going to come in and destroy it. That's what he means by that. It says it will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy.
The stone cut out of the mountain without hands.
The stone without hands. Of course, we know who that is. That's the Messiah. What Daniel is prophesying about the second coming right there. He didn't call it a second coming, but we know from our other understanding of Scripture, that's exactly what Daniel is talking about. The second coming, and of the time that Christ will then put an end to the kingdoms of the earth and will set up his kingdom, which we call what?
Millennial kingdom.
The millennial kingdom. Lastly, verse 46 says, and King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel. Notice, it does not say he worshiped Daniel, because if he'd worshiped Daniel, what do you think Daniel would have told him?
Get up.
Go for
Get
it.
up. Yes, ma'am.
Go get it.
I've got the King James Version right in front of my face, and it says, Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel.
Unfortunately, again, you answered your own question when you said that's what the King James says, because the original Aramaic does not mean worship. It means he paid homage to him. If he'd actually worshiped, once again, what do you think Daniel would have done?
He would
If
accept-
Daniel had accepted worship,
No.
if Daniel had accepted worship, what do you think would have happened to Daniel?
Dead.
His
God would not have
reputation
been
would
happy.
went.
Judged.
God would have punished him.
Which is the same like when the angel was there and somebody fell down and he said, don't.
Yeah. If you look, go back to the original Hebrew, and if you compare some of the other translations, it says he paid homage to him. Basically, he got on his knees before Daniel and honored him. But the original Hebrew and Aramaic word does not mean he worshipped him. It's unfortunate that the King James translated it that way. Says he gave orders to present to him an offering and fragrant incense. The king answered Daniel and says, surely, and this verse 47 is how we know he did not worship Daniel. The king answered Daniel and said, surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since he had been able to reveal this mystery. He didn't say, Daniel, you did this. Nebuchadnezzar heard what Daniel said and said, no, Daniel, you're God. So he's honoring Daniel's God. Said, then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. It's at this point that Daniel has now been made a court official. And he's only probably about 18, maybe 19 years old, tops. But Daniel didn't forget where he came from. Verse 49 says, Daniel made request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon while Daniel was at the king's court. So in other words, Daniel was working there and in the actual royal court of Babylon. But he got Nebuchadnezzar to appoint Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as administrators out in the outlying provinces. That's why in chapter 3, when they called everybody together to worship this big statue that Nebuchadnezzar had made, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got called on the carpet because they were out there where the statue was. Daniel never left Babylon. He was still at the royal court, and which is why he didn't suffer the fate that his three friends did when they got thrown in the fiery furnace. All right.
They didn't suffer much either.
They didn't suffer too much either, I don't think. Maybe just a little,
Do you think all these kingdoms are going to be part of the 10?
No. Only one, these three are gone.
Okay.
This one is gone also, but it's going to be revived. We're going to see the Roman Empire rise again, but in a different form. And we're seeing the makings of that now.
The Pope sure seems to be going along with all the worldly secular things.
And that's another reason why I'm convinced that the Catholic Church will in fact have a significant influence in the tribulation period, because, well, I believe over the centuries there probably have been popes that did know Christ and had a relationship with him. But how many of us would think that the current pope has a clue who Christ actually is?
No.
I don't think so.
I think he's got a real good relationship with Satan.
Might know him pretty good.
Yeah.
I've seen some really bad pictures of him the other day that were online.
Mm-hmm.
Some lady grabbed his arm and he turned and he swatted her and gave her some bad looks.
there are some people that even say that the Pope will be the Antichrist. And as I hear, what was it been about 3 or 4 months ago, I showed you how that if you figure out that using Roman numerals, the Latin title of the Pope as the Vicar of Christ, you come up with 666. So there have been some that have even tried to claim that the Pope is going to be the Antichrist or something, or the false prophet possibly. Antichrist, no, the Pope doesn't meet the requirements for being who the Antichrist is going to be. False prophet? Possibly. That's entirely possible that the Catholic Church and certainly the Pope personally could. Now, don't go forth in here and say, "Thus saith the Lord," it's going to be the Pope. I'm telling you, it could be the Pope.
When you look at like all these TV shows, I'm sorry.
He's got the authority.
Uh-huh.
When you watch all these TV shows and everything with all these woke people, the only people they ever have come on that's religious is a priest or something. It's always a representative, it seems, of the Roman Catholic Church. I don't see a lot of pastors are really allowed to speak their mind, but the Roman Catholic Church seems
They
to
don't
always
like
be
the
there.
name Jesus.
Cause
Yeah.
he agrees with
The
him.
world does not like the
Like
name
Lord
of
Jesus.
He's getting involved in politics. Pope is.
I saw an interview, in fact, just today I was looking at the news, and it was talking about the Christian Reformed Church. And it said that the Christian Reformed Church in their annual convention this year voted to boot out a whole pile of churches that said that if they in any way advocated or acknowledged homosexuality as an acceptable lifestyle, they were gone. Booted them out. I mean, good for them that they booted them out. Well, the news, exactly what you're talking about, the news interviewed some liberal woman who was one of the leaders of one of the churches that got booted out, and she was decrying this decision as to how, our denomination used to be so great, but our denomination has changed. Like, no, you changed. Your denomination is still upholding the same biblical principles that it did 100 years ago. But along the lines of what you're saying, you notice the news they don't interview any of the conservatives or the people that are actually saying, this is why we made this decision. They're interviewing the people who are going,
victims.
"Oh, we're victims because we've been booted out because we're homosexuals." And making them to be the victims, and the church that actually stood, or I should say in this case, the whole denomination that stood for biblical values and said, "No, we're not going to tolerate this." They're the bullies, and they changed. No, they're the ones that actually stayed the same.
Perfectly counterfeited.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Getting late, so let's Mario.